deep you've gotten into it or how much you've looked at samples out there. But at this point, there are, that I just know of, at least 5 other examples of other 3 to 5 municipal member corporations that have done an interlocal agreement just for broadband. And they all look a little bit different, but some of them have used the model which I'm suggesting that we would use here, which is you create a new corporate entity, which would not only own the equipment, but handle the contracting, would have authority to go out to bond or to get a loan, or some combination of those two, to fund the construction or any upgrades that might be necessary. And you would also give that corporation authority to just generally run the system by contract with a franchise holder. And the agreement would also, of course, dictate how charges are assessed to each of the members, any real specifics about procedure for collection. It would have the agreement would have a term. It has to, by statute, have a designated term, and we would at least try to match the useful life of the equipment. So it's probably going to be at least a 20-year endeavor here. So, I understand that everybody right now is proposing to the voters sort of a straw poll or advisory question about whether they want to go down this road in the first place. So it would, that's step one, obviously, to make sure that everybody, at least politically speaking, is on board. And then once we have that, we would start drafting an agreement. I think it would be premature to try to sketch out an agreement right now, but we do have a general sense of what that might look like. So, once we get the authority to go ahead, at least the soft authority to go ahead, we draft the agreement, and then the agreement has to be approved by each municipality's legislative body. And there's no special, notice and hearing process that you'd have to follow for that. But I would suggest in this case that we do 1 or 2 regional meetings at least, so that people understand, the real nitty gritty of how this is all going to work, what the benefits are to them, what the costs are to them. And once we've done that, obviously we would go, I believe, in the case of 3 of the members, to open meetings, and then in Rangeley's case, it would be by referendum vote. And I would hope that we could get that done by the end of the summer, if need be. So once that interlocal agreement is approved by the voters of each of the 4 municipalities, then we would have designated in that agreement authority to probably the municipal officers or some designated people within the 4 members to actually form this corporation with the Secretary of State. And once that corporation has been formed, then all the provisions of the interlocal agreement would kick in. That entity would be able to contract with whatever company has been selected to do the construction and the operation. And things would start rolling from there. Obviously, there would be some period of time where we're trying to get this financed. So the interlocal corporation that we form would have to go out to bond, and maybe if they decide to do grants or other methods of funding, they could do that too. So that's the overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Joe, since I can't see anybody, go ahead.
Okay. Before I do that, I just do want to say that at the end of Kristen's presentation, she mentioned going for bond and possibly grants. I know when this panel or the delegates met a week ago, you talked about wanting to explore some of the grant funding that may be available through the federal government, through the state government. I did my very best to invite someone who's an expert on that to this meeting. She was close, but she couldn't make it. She will be with you on the 25th of May. She is the director of Connect Maine, Peggy Schaefer, I believe her name is. So she's going to be with the delegates on the 25th. So the direction that folks are taking here is to take the bond, and that's kind of the way the schedule is built. But we definitely want to take a listen to see what's available with recent developments. So I just wanted to add that in. So I'm looking at the screen. Joanne, do you have any questions for Kristen?
Well, this isn't directly for Kristen, but I was under the impression that the application for bond needed to be submitted by August 1st, which is well in advance of the end of summer.
So
Is that correct?
the last thing I heard, the last thing we heard from the bond bank was that the application would be due by the 1st of August. There's no actual date. I think I used the 5th day of August as a starting point or ending point and worked backwards from there. That's still kind of the schedule that we're working from. That timeline is still in effect. In fact, I updated it yesterday to reflect your next meeting, and I also plugged in the date for Dallas Plantations town meeting. But that still works backwards from August 5th, which is an aggressive schedule, but we're still thinking that we're going to try and do it that way. We're going to do our best. So to answer your question, yes, the bond application would be due in the 1st of August. And as Kristen noted, it would be the interlocal corporation that would apply for the bond, that would be responsible for the bond. So that all needs to take place. And then in parallel or in tandem to this, we would be attempting to negotiate, or negotiating, I should say, with the provider of choice.
And sorry, I didn't know about that August 1st deadline. And if that's the case, I would aim toward getting all of the meetings and approval for the interlocal agreement complete by, say, the end of June.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty congruent with what we've drawn up. Nope. Okay, Joanne, did you have any other questions?
No.
Rebecca, do you have any questions? Okay, she's shaking her head no. Tracy? No, she says. Mark Beauregard, do you have any questions? Okay. Oh, hi, Mark. Oh, he's shaking his head no. Okay, thank you, sir. Steve?
Yeah, I have a couple questions, Kristen. In our last meeting, there was lengthy discussions relative to ownership, bonding, and upgrades. One of the items that was on Linda's list, and I believe Joanne also asked, is the contract going to reflect timeframes for upgrades so we can stay up with technology as this 20-year process marches on?
So the interlocal corporation is going to have a board. The board would be comprised of membership from, each of the members. And the way I would handle that is not necessarily to fix some schedule for upgrades or any mandate to do that, but essentially give the board the authority to start that process. But I would think, let's say you needed a $500,000 upgrade. I would expect that this group would want to put that to, some sort of a region-wide referendum or, meeting approval. Just a guess, but
Yep. I'm glad you brought it up that way, because in our initial conversations with Consolidated, it was intimated to the group that it was going to be their responsibility to maintain technological upgrades. And the way you're posing it is that they would be coming back to us saying, this is what we need to do for an upgrade. How are you going to pay for it?
Well, that's, kind of not necessarily in the interlocal agreement, but more in the contract. So we could say that in the interlocal agreement, that the authority of the interlocal corporation board is limited to entering an agreement with a franchise or a franchisee who would say, be obligated to do any routine maintenance and upgrades to match then current technological standards, or however we want to put it. And so that's limiting what what the board could actually do and what the contract.
Okay, another question that came up. Thank you. Another question that came up that I struggle with each time, but it is certainly germane to this process. It almost seems to be a defeatist question, but don't take it that way. How does the interlocal agreement address a default by a municipality? Say one of them says, you know, we can't do this and whatever, or default on the company that we choose to go with.
So I was just thinking about this question as I was, preparing for this meeting, and my short answer is there's no great way to recover. There's no great way to recover against a town, right? Because you can get a money judgment against them, but you still can't necessarily force that town to fund whatever the judgment is from taxation. So we also don't want to provide, for leaning municipal property. But I think we do have to provide for maybe, removal from the corporation. But then again, if you remove one entity from the corporation, you know that in perpetuity there, the costs are now redistributed, in greater share to the remaining members. So that's, I'd say, of all of this, the sticky wicket for sure. And I will want to do a survey of all of the other interlocal agreements out there to see how they're handling it.
Okay, very good.
That's
Last question.
Terrible answer, but it's a hard question.
Well, I understand. I mean, this comes up in discussions, and it always draws blank stares from a few of us because it's not our forte, number one, and number two, it's certainly something we have to think about, but nothing anybody relishes in ever having to delve into. Last question for me. In terms of contracts, as the towns get permission to enter this local agreement, do you have a number in mind as to how many people should be on the board or committee or whatever it is we're going to call it? Is it 1, 2, 3 people from each municipality, or is it, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, overall we want an odd number, I would say. And
Okay,
I think
good.
it should, I think it should match the proportion with, to which we're requiring financial responsibility, if that might make sense. So I'm thinking maybe 7 members.
Okay. I was a member of a board when we initially started. I was one of the founding members of the Rangeley Region Health Center. I'm sorry for my phone ringing. Somebody will get it. And we chose to treat Rangeley, Dallas, Sandy River, and Rangeley Plantation. Everybody was equal, and it didn't matter the percentage of people. I don't know that it's smart to do that with this, but I do want the plantations to know Rangeley's value is certainly in some people's minds greater. I don't view it that way. So if we can keep it as close to being even and equitable, I'd feel better about it, but that's just my opinion.
Did any of the bidders give you an estimate of how many users per municipality?
What we got, Kristen, was a percentage of how the project might be parsed out. And I don't have that offhand. It's Rangeley was the highest, and then the other 3 kind of went down from there. Rangeley was like at 40%, and then say, 15, and then the balance, something like that. Joanne, do you remember exactly what those percentages
The
were?
plantations were going to account for 60% of the financing, and I think Rangeley was 39 point something %. Now, that's based on miles, not users. If you go users, then clearly Rangeley would have a much larger number.
Yeah.
I do have a question in regard to something that Steve said. Are we able to put into the interlocal agreement a requirement that the provider cover the cost of bond insurance?
Sure.
And if we had bond insurance, wouldn't that protect each of the entities? each municipality, say Sandy River defaulted, would the bond insurance cover Sandy River's portion for the
Yeah,
other
Right,
three?
it should, provided, number one, that, we're able to actually buy such a bond for an interlocal corporation. And, the bigger if in my mind is whether the franchisor would be willing to foot that bill.
Well, we're basically financing them.
I know.
I think Joanne's point is a very valid one, but wouldn't that come up during negotiations as we work with whatever company is going to provide the service?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Good question, Joanne.
Okay, any other questions on this item?
Sorry to interrupt. One way we could handle that would be to make the entities, the municipalities individually liable for their respective share, but then by contract require any defaults to be pursued by, I'm sorry, who is the entity you're working with? The company?
Consolidated.
Consolidated. To have Consolidated responsible for doing the collection.
Okay.
All right.
Very good. Anybody else have any other closing remarks or questions for Kristen?
Were we going to get samples of the interlocal agreements that she spoke of that she'd seen had been done by other municipalities?
I believe Kristen is very willing to share that with us.
I have to first find them and then I will share them. I know of them having been entered, but I haven't physically seen them. I just did an internet search today and none of them that I could find were actually posted, but there's the Down East Broadband Corporation. There's one that's in the Mid-Coast with Hope Appleton, Lincolnville. There are quite a number of them. So I'm sure if I just contact clerks directly, I can get them.
Yeah, we have the Katahdin region one here. I can send that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, last call for new business with Kristen. Okay, hearing none. Let's go to other business. Any other business to bring up?
Nothing for me.
Okay, Joanne?
No.
Tracy? Rebecca? Mark? He's shaking his head. No. Kristen, do you have any other business?
Nothing.
Okay, item 6 is schedule the next meeting. I do want to point out that on the timeline, there are a couple of things. One of them is we were originally going to meet on May 26th. That has been moved to May 25th at 2 p.m. And that's when Connect Maine is scheduled to be with us to answer any questions about funding that's fairly recent. So she will be here. And while we were talking, our finance director sent me an email that pointed out that the bond bank has finally released the actual date for application, which is August 2nd. Did I read that correctly, Rebecca? She's shaking her head, yes. So we're going to adjust this entire timeline. That's why I put subject to change on the top. And I'll share that with you too, Kristen, once I've got it doctored up so you can see what we're working on. And that was the last action item on the agenda. Anything else anybody wants to add, Steve?
All set, Joe.
Thank you, Mark.
All set.
Rebecca. She's all set. Joanne.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Tracy. She's all set. Kristen. Thank you very much for being with us today. I appreciate it, Kristen. It was very helpful. We look forward to working with you on this process. Next meeting is May 25th at 2. This one is closed. It is now 2:27. Thank you all.
Thanks, Joe. Bye-bye.
Bye.